The idiom fresh off the boat, or FOB, or FOB, refers to someone who is a new immigrant or a newcomer into a culture, usually used in American culture, but now also used in the British culture as well. But someone who has recently immigrated, who has come in recently, and doesn't feel comfortable with the culture yet, and maybe doesn't speak the language very well either. So if someone is fresh off the boat, that means they have recently come into the country and they are not familiar yet with the language and maybe with the customs of that country. Now, the United States is a country that has many immigrants. And many of those immigrants, of course all of those immigrants until modern times, arrived by boat. We had Ellis Island in New York, in which many immigrants came from different parts of Europe, from Italy, from Eastern Europe, from Ireland, by boat. Now, it's not clear exactly when people started using the phrase fresh off the boat, but it definitely was in use by the year 1900, where people who were already in the United States, they maybe were second or even third generation, and they saw people from the old country. That's a common expression in the United States for people referring to where their parents or their grandparents might have come from. So if someone was, for example, an Italian American, the old country would be Italy, and they would see people coming in from Italy. They would be fresh off the boat from the old country. Now, in that use, it usually was okay to say that. It was the reason they would say that is to let people know the difference between people who had just arrived and people who had been here for 2 or 3 generations. However, as we get into the 20th century, this phrase became very commonly used in Asian American communities, especially from the 1950s and 1960s and even into the 1980s as immigration from Asia picked up. Now, there were many Asians, especially those in Hawaii or the western states, California, Oregon, and Washington, who had been there for generations. They had been there even in some cases since the middle of the 19th century. And they saw these large groups of immigrants coming in from Korea, not from Japan, from Korea, from Taiwan, from China, from Vietnam, Southeast Asia. And they would often look down on these new immigrants who couldn't speak the language very well, who did not know the culture very well, whereas those who had been here for several generations mixed in rather well by then. So they started calling them fresh off the boat. And in this case, it was to look down on the people who came in. So where at first it was not used with this intent, but by the time it became common in the Asian American communities, it was generally to look down on people who were recently coming in. So later it became widely used by Asian Americans towards new arrivals, and it was to look down on them. Today, however, some immigrant communities have embraced the term, and have accepted it and have referred to them as fobs or being fobby. But this is a phrase you have to be careful how you use it, because in some situations it can be offensive. It depends on how you use it. So if you're not sure of who you're talking with, or what you're doing, or what you're talking to, or who you're talking to, maybe you shouldn't use it. But you do still hear it in conversation. You'll hear it on television. You'll read it in newspapers even. You'll read it on websites. So this is a phrase you need to know. But if you're not comfortable with it, be careful actually using it. Let's practice. Let's look at some examples. We're not going to practice here. Don't mind him. He is fresh off the boat. This usage is probably going to be okay, because you're talking to a friend of yours. Maybe he's recently come into the country, having a problem communicating. You're helping him out. You're his friend, this situation, it's probably okay. You're letting the person you're talking to know that maybe he doesn't understand what you're saying very well, and you're just trying to help him. But look at number 2. This is kind of a kidding way of saying, you're such a fob. Okay. Not really offensive or derogatory, kind of used in a teasing or fun way. Saying it at a friend who is acting in a way of someone who is a recent immigrant to the country. Okay. Maybe acting like someone who is still thinking like he's back in Vietnam or back in China, okay, which is still very common among newcomers, and of course many times newcomers and those who have been in the country for a couple of generations do interact. Yeah, they're friends. You're such a fob. Kind of a kidding, fun way of kind of teasing someone who still keeps some of those characteristics from the old country in Asia. The third one is definitely not okay. They are so fresh off the boat. Look at those people. They are so fresh off the boat. This is derogatory. This is used to insult. This is used to look down on people. Obviously, people who have just come into the country, they might be speaking Vietnamese or Chinese, wearing Vietnamese clothes, acting in a very Vietnamese way, maybe even still flying the old South Vietnamese flag at home. Okay. Very, very common in some Asian communities in the United States, especially among new immigrants. They are so fresh off the boat. Okay. This is definitely derogatory. Some groups call these phrases politically insensitive. And in the third usage, it most certainly is. Some people are sensitive. Some people are too sensitive. So, as I said, be careful how you use it. But you must be aware of the fact that this phrase is used in American English and increasingly in British English with their large number of immigrants, especially from South Asia, from the Indian subcontinent. This has been an installment of Word and Idioms Origins. 如果你还有英文问题，你可以上 FB 台中新英文美语，你可以上 YouTube TCNEEnglish。如果你在台中，你找英文老师，你可以在 FB 跟我联络。谢谢你收看。